She had 2 seconds to decide. Let the most dangerous man in Korea drink the poison or kiss him in front of 300 witnesses and destroy her entire life. The champagne glass was already at his lips when Margaret stepped forward. Security moved toward their weapons. The bride's perfect smile turned venomous, and Margaret did the one thing a catering manager should never do. She grabbed Yoo Ji-woo's face and kissed the dragon himself. Hey family, before this story unfolds, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Your comments fuel these stories and keep this channel alive. And don't forget to smash that subscribe button because what Margaret does next will leave you absolutely speechless. The ballroom exploded into chaos. Gasps ripped through the air like breaking glass. Conversations died instantly. A champagne flute slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the polished marble, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Men who had built empires on violence instinctively reached inside their jackets, fingers finding cold metal. Women froze mid-laugh, their expressions shifting from celebration to shock. Yoo Ji-woo did not flinch. He stood perfectly still in his custom black tuxedo, the dragon tattoo barely visible above his collar. The most feared man in Seoul, and suddenly the most vulnerable. The kiss lasted 3 seconds, but in those 3 seconds, Margaret felt the full weight of her decision crush down on her chest like concrete. She was going to die. She knew it with absolute certainty. As she pulled back, her lips still dangerously close to his, she whispered against his mouth, her voice trembling despite every attempt to stay calm. The champagne, it's poisoned. Don't drink it. Hands grabbed her immediately. Security yanked her backwards so violently she nearly fell, her catering uniform twisting around her body. Someone shouted in Korean. Someone else cursed in a dialect she couldn't place. Chairs scraped loudly as syndicate members stood, their bodies coiled, ready for blood. What is this? So-min screamed, her voice cracking with humiliation and rage. The bride in the red dress looked like a woman whose kingdom was collapsing in real time. Get this woman away from him, now. Margaret didn't fight. Her heart hammered so violently she thought it might break through her ribs, but her eyes stayed locked on Ji-woo's face. She needed to see something, anything that told her she hadn't just sacrificed herself for nothing. For one terrible moment, his expression revealed nothing. Then his gaze dropped to the champagne glass still in his hand. It was a small movement, barely a flicker, but it changed the entire room. Enough. His voice was quiet, controlled, lethal. The room went silent. Let her go. The guards hesitated, their grip still tight on Margaret's arms. Sir, she assaulted you at your own wedding. Ji-woo turned his head slightly, and his eyes cut through the man like a blade through silk. I said, he repeated, each word colder than the last. Let her go. They released her instantly. A wave of confusion rippled through the crowd. So-min stared at him, disbelief and fury warring on her beautiful face. Ji-woo, are you serious right now? She just humiliated me, us, in front of everyone who matters. He didn't look at her. His eyes never left Margaret's face. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised the champagne glass and tilted it. The golden liquid splashed onto the marble floor. Where it landed, the floor hissed softly, a faint wisp of smoke rising from the stone. Poison. The room erupted again, this time with accusation and panic. Everyone out, Ji-woo said, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. The wedding is over. Murmurs exploded instantly. Protest, confusion, demands for explanation. But no one argued for long. When Yoo Ji-woo ended something, it ended. Within minutes, the grand ballroom began to empty. Syndicate families filing out with their security, their eyes hungry for gossip, their minds already calculating the implications. Margaret stood frozen in the center of the emptying room, her legs trembling, her server's apron wrinkled and stained, her pulse roaring in her ears. She had done it. She had warned him. Whether she survived what came next was no longer in her control. 2 men in black suits appeared at her sides. Not rough this time, but firm. They escorted her through a private corridor she didn't know existed, down a hallway lined with paintings that probably cost more than her apartment building, and into a small room with no windows. 1 table, 2 chairs, cold, clinical lighting. The door closed behind her, locked. Margaret sat down slowly, pressing her hands together in her lap to keep them from shaking. Her mind replayed So-min's voice from earlier, when Margaret had been refilling champagne flutes in the preparation room. That soft, musical laugh, that casual cruelty. After the toast, darling. It has to be after the toast when everyone's watching. Accidents happen all the time, especially at celebrations. And with everything in my name already. Margaret swallowed hard. She should have walked away. She should have pretended she heard nothing, kept her head down, collected her paycheck, and gone home to her sister. But then she remembered the way Jiwoo had smiled earlier when greeting guests, unaware, accepting congratulations from people who would mourn him publicly and divide his empire privately. Her chest tightened. She would make the same choice again. The door opened. Jiwoo stepped inside alone. He closed the door behind him and locked it himself, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel. Margaret stood up immediately, her chair scraping loudly. "I can explain. Sit." Something in his voice made her obey without thinking. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he walked to the table with controlled, deliberate movements, removing his jacket and draping it over the back of the chair. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing more of the dragon tattoo that wound up his forearm like a living thing. Then he placed the empty champagne glass on the table between them. "You saved my life," he said. Her throat tightened. "Yes. Why?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Margaret met his gaze. Those dark eyes that had seen too much violence, made too many impossible choices. "Because I couldn't walk away knowing what I knew and doing nothing." "You don't know me," he said. "You don't owe me anything. I wasn't doing it for you," she said before she could stop herself. His eyebrow lifted slightly. "Then for who?" "For me," she said quietly. "I couldn't live with that on my conscience. I couldn't let someone die when I had the power to stop it, even if that someone is." She hesitated. "Even if you're who you are." He studied her. Not like a predator studying prey, not like a boss evaluating an employee, like a man trying to understand something unexpected, something that didn't fit into his carefully controlled world. "You planned this," he said. "The kiss." "No," she said quickly. "I swear I didn't plan the kiss. I panicked. There were too many guards, too much noise. There was no other way to get close enough to warn you. And the accusation? You could have been wrong." "I wasn't wrong." Margaret's voice steadied. "I heard her. Your fiancé. She was in the preparation room with someone, talking about the toast, about timing, about how everything would be in her name after you were gone." She paused. "I serve people like you for a living, Mr. Yu. I know what ambition sounds like when it's willing to kill." A faint, humorless smile flickered across his face before disappearing. "You're either very brave," he said, "or very reckless." Margaret exhaled shakily. "I've been called worse." He leaned back slightly, arms folding across his chest. The dragon seemed to move with him. "What's your name?" "Margaret. Margaret Bowers." "American?" "American enough." "And you work for the catering company?" "I manage the team, yes." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken calculations. Then Jiwoo asked quietly, "What are you running from, Margaret Bowers?" Her chest tightened. "I don't know what you mean." "Your hands were shaking before you kissed me," he said calmly. "That wasn't fear of me. That was fear you already carry. You live with it every day." His eyes never left hers. "So I'll ask again. What are you running from?" Margaret looked down, her jaw clenching. She shouldn't tell him. She didn't know this man. But something about the way he asked, the way he listened, made the truth claw its way up her throat. "I have a younger sister," she said finally. "She's 17. I've been taking care of her since our parents died 4 years ago. I work 3 jobs to keep her in school, keep us fed, keep us safe." She swallowed hard. "That's what I was protecting when I kissed you. Not you. My ability to keep doing that. Because if I had done nothing and you died and someone found out I heard something." She met his eyes. "People like you don't leave witnesses, Mr. Yu." For the first time since entering the room, something shifted in Jiwoo's expression. Not softness exactly, but recognition. Understanding. "You're right," he said quietly. "We don't." Margaret's blood went cold. Then he added, "Which is why you're in more danger now than you've ever been in your life." "What?" Margaret whispered. Jiwoo leaned forward, his voice dropping. "So Min isn't just my fiancée. She's the daughter of the Busan Syndicate. This wedding was a merger. A peace treaty between families who have been at war for a decade. By stopping that toast, by humiliating her in front of every power player in Korea, you didn't just save me. You destroyed a political alliance that cost years to build." Margaret felt the air leave her lungs. "I didn't know." "It doesn't matter what you knew," he interrupted, but not unkindly. "It matters what she'll do now. So Min won't come for me. I'm too protected, too powerful. But you?" His eyes held hers. "You're a catering manager with a teenage sister. You're exposed, vulnerable, easy. Then what do I do?" Margaret's voice cracked. I can't just leave the country. I have my sister, my life. You can't go home, Jiwoo said flatly. The moment you walk out of this building, you're a target. So-min has already sent people to find out who you are, where you live, who you love. He paused. Your sister is already being watched. Terror flooded through Margaret like ice water. No, you can't let them. I won't. His voice cut through her panic like a blade. But you have to trust me. Trust you? Margaret almost laughed, hysteria creeping in. I don't even know you. You knew me well enough to risk your life for mine, Jiwoo said. So now I'm going to do the same for yours. He stood, towering over her. And for the first time, Margaret saw not the cold syndicate boss, but the man beneath. The one who had almost died tonight. The one she saved. There's only one way to keep you alive, he said. So-min can't touch you if you belong to me. Margaret's heart stopped. What? Tomorrow morning, I'm going to tell every family in Seoul that you're mine. That the kiss wasn't an assault. It was a claim. That you're my mistress, my choice, and anyone who harms you answers to me personally. His eyes burned with intensity. It's a lie that will become your armor. And if I say no, then you die, Jiwoo said simply. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And your sister will be alone in this world with no one to protect her. Margaret stared at him, her mind racing. This was insane. This was a cage disguised as salvation. But as she thought about her sister, about the life she'd built from nothing, about the responsibility she carried every single day, she realized something terrible. She didn't have a choice. She never had. How long? She whispered. Until the threat is gone, Jiwoo said. Until I root out every traitor in my organization and neutralize So-min permanently. And then you're free. Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the walls close in around her. When she opened them again, Yoo Ji-woo was still watching her with those impossible dark eyes. Okay, she said. I'll do it. The dragon smiled. Not cruelly, almost sadly. Welcome to the cage, Margaret Bowers. I promise I'll make it as comfortable as possible. As he moved toward the door to make arrangements, Margaret realized with terrifying clarity that the most dangerous part of this deal wasn't So-min's revenge or the syndicate's violence. It was the way her heart had stuttered when Jiwoo promised to protect her. The way the monster with the dragon tattoo might be the only man who ever actually could. Margaret saw it happen in the reflection of a champagne flute. She'd been standing near the service station, barely 10 feet from the bride's preparation table, holding a tray of fresh glasses when the powder fell. A tiny vial. A quick twist of So-min's wrist. The white substance dissolving instantly into the golden champagne meant for the ceremonial toast. The bride's smile never wavered as she handed the glass to her attendant with instructions to place it at the groom's seat. Margaret's hands went numb. The tray tilted dangerously before she caught it, the glasses clinking together in a sound that seemed deafening in her own ears but went unnoticed by everyone else. Around her, the wedding reception continued in oblivious elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in silk. Musicians played something classical and beautiful. 300 guests in designer suits and couture gowns laughed and drank and celebrated a union that was about to become a murder. She should walk away. She should pretend she saw nothing. She was just the catering manager, hired help, invisible to people like these. Her job was to make sure the champagne flowed and the appetizers circulated, and everyone went home satisfied. Her job was not to get involved in the private business of the Korean Mafia, but Margaret couldn't move. She stood frozen, watching So-min glide across the ballroom in that stunning red dress, her smile perfect, her hand resting possessively on Yoo Ji-woo's arm as she guided him toward the stage for the toast. The woman was about to murder her own fiancé in front of everyone who mattered and make it look like a tragic accident. Margaret's mind raced. She could tell security, but which security? Half the guards worked for Ji-woo's family, half for So-min's. She didn't know who was loyal to whom. She could try to grab the glass before the toast. But the stage was elevated, surrounded by guards, and she was just the help. They'd never let her get close. The master of ceremonies was calling for attention. Guests were turning toward the stage. Ji-woo was reaching for the poisoned champagne glass, his hand moving in slow motion while Margaret's heart thundered in her chest. 2 seconds. That's all she had. 2 seconds to decide between her safety and his life. 2 seconds to choose between walking away clean or destroying everything she'd built. Margaret set down her tray with shaking hands and started walking. Not toward security, not toward the exit, toward the stage. Her legs moved on autopilot while her brain screamed at her to stop, to turn around, to save herself. But her feet kept moving, carrying her through the crowd of syndicate members and business elites who barely glanced at the woman in the catering uniform. A guard stepped in front of her as she approached the stage. "Staff aren't allowed. I have an urgent message for Mr. Yu," Margaret said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded when everything inside her was chaos. "From the kitchen, about the food." The guard hesitated. Behind him, Jiwoo was lifting the champagne glass. The MC was saying something about unity and strength in the future. So-min's smile was radiant, poisonous. Margaret didn't wait for permission. She ducked around the guard and ran up the stage steps. Gasps erupted immediately. Someone shouted, multiple someones. But Margaret's eyes were locked on Yu Jiwoo, on the glass rising toward his lips, on the 2 seconds she had left to make this work. She'd never kissed anyone like this before. She'd never grabbed a stranger's face and pressed her mouth to theirs without permission, without warning, without any of the things that were supposed to come before a kiss. But Margaret didn't think. She just moved. Her hands found Jiwoo's lapels, fisted in the expensive fabric of his tuxedo, and pulled him toward her with a force that surprised them both. Their lips collided. The room erupted in chaos, shocked gasps, shouted questions. The sound of chairs scraping as people stood. But Margaret held on, held the kiss for 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, just long enough to get close to his ear and whisper 4 words that would save his life and destroy hers. The champagne is poisoned. She felt him go rigid, felt the moment of confusion turn to calculation. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the stage floor, champagne splashing across the polished wood. Where the liquid landed, it hissed. Actual hissing, like acid on metal. Small wisps of smoke rising from the finish. The room went silent. Every eye fixed on the sizzling champagne. Then So-min screamed. It wasn't a gasp of shock or a cry of concern. It was a scream of pure rage, the sound of a plan falling apart in real time. "Security! Get her away from him!" "What is she doing?" "Someone stop her." Hands grabbed Margaret immediately. Rough hands that yanked her backward so hard she stumbled, nearly falling off the stage. Her uniform twisted around her body. Someone's grip left bruises on her arms. She heard shouting in Korean, in English, in languages she couldn't identify. The beautiful wedding reception had transformed into something dangerous in the span of 5 seconds. But Margaret's eyes stayed on Jiwoo. She needed to see if he understood, if he believed her, if he was going to let them drag her away to whatever fate awaited women who assaulted mafia bosses at their own weddings. His face was unreadable. Those dark eyes swept from the hissing champagne to Margaret to So-min, who stood frozen in her red dress with an expression that had moved past fury into something closer to fear. Calculation played across Jiwoo's features. He was putting it together. The powder, the kiss, the warning, the bride's reaction. "Don't move her," Jiwoo said quietly. The guards holding Margaret went still, their grips loosening slightly but not releasing. He looked directly at Margaret for the first time since the kiss, studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "Who are you?" "Margaret Bowers. I manage the catering team." Her voice shook despite her best efforts. "I saw someone tamper with your glass. I didn't know how else to warn you." "She's lying." So-min's voice was shrill now, desperate. "She's clearly working for someone. This is an attack, an assassination attempt on both of us. You can't possibly believe." "The champagne is smoking," Jiwoo interrupted, still looking at Margaret. "Why is it smoking?" "Because it's poison," Margaret said. "I watched someone put powder in it, white powder from a small vial. It dissolved instantly." She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry about the kiss. I panicked. There were too many guards and I didn't know who to trust, and you were about to drink it and I reacted." Something shifted in Jiwoo's expression. Not warmth exactly, but a flicker of something human beneath the cold exterior. He knelt down on the stage, removed a ring from his finger, and dipped it into the spilled champagne. When he lifted it, the silver had turned completely black. The crowd gasped again, louder this time, recognition spreading through the room like wildfire. Everyone here knew what a blackened silver ring meant. Everyone understood what they were looking at. So-min was ready to kill her own fiancé for power, Margaret said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. The reality was hitting her now, the magnitude of what she'd witnessed, what she'd prevented. She smiled at you, held your arm, guided you to your death and smiled the whole time. If you can't stand backstabbing people who smile to your face while holding a knife, you understand why Margaret couldn't walk away. Some betrayals are too cruel to ignore. Some loyalties matter more than safety. Jiwoo stood slowly, the blackened ring still in his hand, and looked at his bride. So-min's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. Her mouth opened and closed without sound. She looked like a woman watching her entire future collapse in real time. "Everyone out," Jiwoo said. His voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that came before violence. The wedding is over. Margaret's legs finally gave out. She would have fallen if the guards hadn't been holding her. This was it. This was where everything changed. She'd saved a man's life, and now she was standing in the wreckage of whatever came next. The dragon had been warned, and nothing would ever be the same. So-min was ready to kill her own fiancé for power. If you can't stand backstabbing people who smile to your face while holding a knife, smash that like button right now. Let's show them we value loyalty. The barrel of the gun was 3 inches from Margaret's temple. She could see it in her peripheral vision, black and cold, held by a man whose hand didn't shake. Around her, 5 more guards had materialized from the crowd, each one armed, each one waiting for the order. The wedding guests hadn't left yet. They stood frozen in a wide circle around the scene. Phones hidden but recording. Eyes hungry for violence or scandal or both. Margaret's breath came in short, shallow bursts. Her catering uniform clung to her back with sweat. She'd kissed a Mafia boss at his own wedding, and now she was going to die in front of 300 witnesses who would forget her name by morning. Yu Ji-woo stood perfectly still, his hand still holding the champagne flute she'd tried to save him from. His expression revealed nothing. No anger, no gratitude, no emotion whatsoever. He could have been carved from stone. So-min moved first. The bride in the red dress stepped forward, her face twisted with a fury that made her beautiful features ugly. "Kill her," she said, her voice shaking. "Kill her right now for what she's done. In front of everyone. Make an example." The guard's finger moved to the trigger. "Wait." Ji-woo's voice cut through the tension like a knife through silk. He raised one hand, barely lifting it from his side, but every gun in the room shifted focus. Every guard went rigid. Even So-min froze mid-step. Margaret's heart hammered so violently she thought her ribs might crack. Ji-woo moved with the unhurried grace of a man who had never needed to rush because the world waited for him. He walked to where the champagne had spilled on the marble floor, each footstep echoing in the silent ballroom. Then he knelt down, his expensive tuxedo pants touching the polished stone, and removed a ring from his left hand. It was silver, engraved with symbols Margaret didn't recognize. Old, valuable, the kind of thing that had been passed down through generations of men who understood poison. Ji-woo dipped the ring into the puddle of champagne. When he lifted it, the silver had turned black. Not tarnished, not stained. Black, like someone had held it over a flame until all the shine burned away. The crowd gasped. Murmurs erupted like wildfire. Margaret heard the word poison in 3 different languages, heard someone's sharp intake of breath, heard So-min's heels click rapidly backward on the marble. Ji-woo stood slowly, holding the blackened ring up to the light where everyone could see it. His face remained expressionless, but something had changed in his eyes. Something cold and calculating and infinitely dangerous. "Lower your weapons," he said quietly. The guards hesitated, looking between him and So-min. Margaret could see the calculation in their faces, the question of who actually held power in this moment. So-min's family controlled Busan. Her dowry had funded half the syndicate's operations. Her connections reached into government offices and police precincts across the country. "I said lower them." This time Ji-woo's voice dropped to a register that made Margaret's skin prickle. Now, the guns came down. Slowly, reluctantly. But they came down. So-min stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture that was meant to look innocent but came across as desperate. "Ji-woo, darling, this is insane." Obviously someone tampered with the champagne. "But that woman," she pointed at Margaret with a trembling finger, "she's clearly involved. She created a distraction. She's probably working for your enemies." "Is she?" Ji-woo turned to face his fiancée fully for the first time since the kiss. The dragon tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse in the chandelier light. "Then why would she warn me? Why would she risk her own life in front of 300 armed men to stop me from drinking? Because she's creating confusion." So-min's voice cracked. "She's trying to make you doubt me." "I don't doubt you," Ji-woo said softly. "I know exactly what you are." The room went silent. Even the whispers died. Margaret watched So-min's face drain of color, watched her perfect composure crumble like a sandcastle hit by a wave. This was the moment. The moment when the bride realized her plan had failed, and her future was collapsing. So-min's father pushed through the crowd, a thick man in an expensive suit with eyes like a shark. "Yu Ji-woo, we had an agreement. Our families are no longer united," Ji-woo finished. He looked at So-min's father with the same empty expression he'd given everyone else. "Your daughter just tried to murder me at our wedding, in my own home, using poison that I assume came from your connections in Busan." He held up the blackened ring. "Did you think I wouldn't test it? Did you think I'd gotten soft? You have no proof it was her," the father started. I have all the proof I need. Jiwoo gestured to Margaret without looking at her. This woman risked everything to warn me. Why would she do that if she was part of the plot? He paused. Unless you're suggesting she's simply stupid. But stupid people don't work their way up to catering manager positions at events like this. Margaret's breath caught. He'd noticed her position. He'd paid attention to details even in the chaos. Somin was shaking now, her hands clenched into fists. Jiwoo, please, we can talk about this privately. No, he said. We're done talking. We're done pretending. We're done with this farce of a marriage. He turned to face the crowd, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the ballroom. The wedding is cancelled. The alliance between the Yu and Park families is severed, effective immediately. Chaos erupted. Shouting. Accusations. Somin's family pushing forward while Jiwoo's men formed a protective barrier, but Jiwoo ignored all of it. Instead, he walked directly to Margaret, who was still standing with guards on either side of her, and held out his hand. She stared at it like it might bite her. Take it, he said quietly, meant only for her ears. Trust me. Margaret didn't trust him. How could she? But she also didn't have a choice. She placed her shaking hand in his, and his fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness. Then Jiwoo turned back to the crowd and said something that would change Margaret's life forever. This woman, he announced, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, is mine. She is under my protection. She is the reason I'm still breathing. And she is worth more to me than any political alliance. He pulled Margaret closer, his arm sliding around her waist in a possessive gesture that made her breath catch. Somin tried to kill me for power, but this woman saved me for nothing. That's the difference between ambition and loyalty. Somin screamed. An actual scream of rage and humiliation that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. You're choosing a servant over me? Over everything our family's built? I'm choosing someone who doesn't want me dead, Jiwoo said simply. Then he looked down at Margaret, and for the first time, something almost human flickered in his eyes. Hold on to me. What? He didn't give her time to finish. Jiwoo swept Margaret up into his arms like she weighed nothing, turned, and walked toward the private exit with long, deliberate strides. The crowd parted before him automatically. Guards fell into formation, and Margaret, pressed against the chest of the most dangerous man in Korea, realized she'd just been claimed in front of everyone who mattered. The dragon had made his decision, and Margaret was now part of it, whether she liked it or not. The penthouse was on the 47th floor, and Margaret counted every second of the elevator ride. She stood between two guards who hadn't spoken since dragging her out of the wedding venue and into a black SUV with windows so tinted she couldn't see the Seoul streets passing by. Her catering uniform was wrinkled and stained with champagne. Her feet ached in the practical shoes she'd worn for 12 hours of work, and her mind kept replaying the same moment over and over. Jiwoo's arm around her waist, his voice declaring her as his in front of 300 witnesses, Somin's scream echoing off the ballroom ceiling. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. No hallway, no other apartments, just straight into a space that probably cost more than Margaret would earn in 10 lifetimes. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city lights. Modern furniture that looked uncomfortable but expensive. Art on the walls that she recognized from her community college, art history class, actual museum pieces, not prints. Everything was white and black and chrome, cold and beautiful, and utterly impersonal. Wait here, one of the guards said, gesturing to a leather sofa that probably cost more than her car. Margaret didn't sit. She walked straight to the windows and pressed her forehead against the cool glass, trying to steady her breathing. Somewhere down there in that sprawling city was her apartment. Her sister, Keisha, probably asleep by now, unaware that Margaret's entire life had just imploded. Tomorrow was a school day. Keisha had a chemistry test she'd been studying for all week. I need to go home, Margaret said without turning around. I need to call my sister. She'll be worried. Mr. Yu will speak with you shortly, the guard replied. I don't want to speak with Mr. Yu. I want to go home. Margaret's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. I did what I came to do. I warned him. The wedding is over. I should be able to leave. The guards exchanged glances but said nothing. They stood by the elevator doors like statues, hands folded in front of them, faces expressionless. Margaret realized with creeping dread that she wasn't a guest here. She was a prisoner in a very expensive cage. 15 minutes passed, then 30. Margaret paced the length of the windows, her mind racing through possibilities. She could try to run, but the guards blocked the only exit. She could call the police, but what would she say? That she'd kissed a Mafia boss and now he'd brought her to his penthouse? That would go well. She could. The elevator doors opened, Yu Jiwoo stepped out, still in his tuxedo but with the jacket gone and his tie loosened. He'd rolled up his sleeves, and Margaret could see more of the dragon tattoo that wound up his forearm. It was intricate, beautiful in a dangerous way, the kind of art that took hundreds of hours and cost more pain than money. "Leave us," he said to the guards. They disappeared into the elevator without question, and suddenly Margaret was alone with the man she'd kissed, the man whose life she'd saved, the man who'd claimed her in front of everyone who mattered in Seoul's underworld. "I need to go home," Margaret said immediately. "My sister." "Your sister is fine," Jiwoo interrupted. "I have 3 men watching your apartment. Keisha Bowers, 17 years old, senior at Hamilton International School. She came home at 9:15, microwaved leftover pasta, studied for approximately 2 hours, and went to bed at 11:30. Margaret's blood went cold. "How do you're watching her? You sent people to—" "I'm protecting her," Jiwoo corrected. He walked to a bar cart and poured himself something amber from a crystal decanter. He didn't offer her any. Somin's family has extensive connections. The moment that wedding ended, they started gathering information on you, where you live, where you work, who you care about. He took a sip, his eyes never leaving Margaret's face. "Your sister would have been dead by morning if I hadn't put protection in place." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. She sank onto the expensive sofa, her legs finally giving out. "Dead?" "She didn't do anything. She doesn't even know what happened tonight. It doesn't matter what she did or didn't do." Jiwoo set down his glass and moved closer, sitting on the edge of the coffee table so they were eye level. "You humiliated So-min. You exposed her murder plot in front of the most powerful families in Korea. You cost her everything, her marriage, her alliance, her future. Women like that don't forgive. They destroy." "Then let me leave," Margaret said desperately. "Let me take Keisha and disappear. We'll leave Seoul, leave Korea entirely. You'll never see us again. You think you can hide from the Park family?" Jiwoo's laugh was humorless. "They have reach in 15 countries. They own police precincts, border officials, airport security. You wouldn't make it to Incheon before they found you." He leaned forward. "And even if you did somehow escape, what kind of life would that be? Running forever? Looking over your shoulder? Waiting for the knife?" Margaret's hands were shaking. She pressed them together in her lap, trying to stop the trembling. "So what then? You're keeping me here? I'm just supposed to stay in this penthouse while my sister—" "Your sister stays in her apartment under protection," Jiwoo said. "She goes to school, takes her tests, lives her normal life, because no one will touch her if they think she's connected to me." "Connected to you how?" Jiwoo stood and walked to the windows, his back to Margaret. The dragon tattoo on his neck was fully visible now, curling up from beneath his collar. In the reflected city lights, it almost looked alive. "I need you to understand something," he said quietly. "This tattoo isn't decoration. It's a brand. It means I inherited my father's empire when I was 19 years old. It means I carry the weight of 2,000 men and their families. It means I can never put this burden down. Never walk away, never be anything other than what I am." He turned to face her. "It also means that anything I claim as mine is untouchable." Margaret's breath caught. "You already did that, at the wedding. You told everyone I was that I belonged to." "I told them you were worth more to me than a political alliance," Jiwoo corrected. "But words aren't enough. So-min's family will test that claim. They'll probe for weakness. They'll look for evidence that you're just a convenient lie." He moved closer, and Margaret had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "We need to make them believe it's real." "Make them believe what's real? That you're mine. That you're my lover. That harming you would be the same as declaring war on me personally." Jiwoo's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing a business contract instead of Margaret's entire life. "It's the only way to keep you and your sister safe until I can deal with So-min and the traitors in my organization." Margaret stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "You want me to pretend to be your mistress? That's insane. I don't know you. I don't know anything about your world. I'm a catering manager who works 3 jobs to pay rent. I'm not." "You're brave enough to kiss a Mafia boss to save his life," Jiwoo said. "You're smart enough to recognize poison when you see it. You're strong enough to raise your sister alone after your parents died." He tilted his head slightly. "Don't pretend you're not capable of this, Margaret. We both know better." The use of her first name felt intimate in a way that made her uncomfortable. Margaret wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was in this space, in this situation, with this man who saw too much. "How long?" she asked. "Until the threat is neutralized. Weeks, maybe months. And then you're free. I'll give you enough money to relocate anywhere you want, Set up a new life. Put your sister through any university she chooses. Jiwoo returned to the bar cart and refilled his glass. Or you can stay in Seoul under my continued protection. Your choice. Margaret stared at him, trying to find the trap in his words, the hidden cost. Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. I chose to warn you. That was my decision. You saved my life. Something flickered in Jiwoo's expression, too quick to identify. Now I'm saving yours. Consider us even. But Margaret knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing with men like you, Jiwoo, was ever that simple. Still, as she thought about Keisha sleeping peacefully in their apartment, unaware that her sister's impulsive decision had painted a target on both their backs, Margaret realized she didn't have a choice. She never really had. Jiwoo is trying to do the right thing in a bad situation, Margaret thought. He's offering protection when he could just let So-min's family destroy her. But that didn't make the cage any less real. Okay, Margaret said finally. I'll do it. I'll play the role. But I have conditions. Jiwoo's eyebrow lifted slightly. You're negotiating? You said I'm brave and smart, didn't you? Margaret met his gaze steadily despite the fear coursing through her. My sister doesn't know anything about this. She thinks I'm working late. I want to keep it that way. I want to see her, talk to her, make sure she's really okay. Agreed. And no, Margaret's courage faltered. No actual intimacy. This is business. Protection for performance. Nothing more. Jiwoo studied her for a long moment, and Margaret couldn't read his expression. Then he nodded slowly. Nothing you don't consent to. But understand this in public. You must be convincing. You must look at me like you want me. Touch me like you know me. Defend me like you love me. Anything less and they'll know it's fake. Margaret's stomach twisted. I understand. Then we have a deal. Jiwoo extended his hand. Formal, businesslike. Margaret took it, and his grip was warm and firm and somehow reassuring despite everything. Welcome to the Gilded Cage, Margaret Bowers. I'll do everything in my power to make sure you survive it. As his fingers released hers, Margaret looked around the cold, expensive penthouse and realized the dragon had been right about one thing. She couldn't run from this. She could only survive it. And surviving meant becoming someone she'd never planned to be, the woman who belonged to you, Jiwoo. Even if it was all a lie. Jiwoo is trying to do the right thing in a bad situation, but So-min is just bitter. If you believe innocent people shouldn't pay for the mistakes of toxic exes, hit subscribe and comment "Leave Margaret alone. Let's protect our girl." The contract arrived on expensive paper at 7 in the morning, delivered by a woman in a designer suit who introduced herself as Jiwoo's attorney and didn't blink when Margaret answered the penthouse door in borrowed pajamas. Margaret had spent the night in a guest room that was bigger than her entire apartment, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling and wondering what she'd agreed to. Now she sat at the kitchen island with coffee she didn't remember making, reading through 8 pages of legal language that basically said she belonged to Yu Jiwoo for an unspecified period of time in exchange for protection and compensation. It's not slavery, the attorney said, as if reading Margaret's thoughts. You can leave at any time. But the protection ends the moment you walk away. Margaret signed it with shaking hands. What choice did she have? Jiwoo appeared an hour later, showered and dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than Margaret's car. He looked well-rested, unbothered, like he hadn't just canceled his wedding and declared war on one of the most powerful families in Korea. The dragon tattoo peeked above his collar, a reminder of what he was beneath the expensive veneer. We need to establish our story, he said without preamble, settling onto the sofa across from her. How we met. When we started seeing each other. Why I chose you over So-min. Margaret set down her coffee cup carefully. Can't we just say it's none of their business? We could. But then they'll fill in the blanks with their own theories, and those theories will make you look weak. A conquest. A momentary distraction. Jiwoo's eyes held hers. We need a narrative that makes you untouchable. Fine. Margaret pulled her knees up to her chest, trying to maintain some sense of personal space, even though they were sitting 10 feet apart. What's the story? We met 6 months ago. You were catering an event at one of my hotels. I noticed you immediately. Your competence, your grace under pressure, the way you handled a difficult situation with one of the guests. That's oddly specific. It needs to be. Details make lies believable. Jiwoo leaned back, utterly relaxed. I pursued you. You resisted at first because you knew what I was, what getting involved with me would mean. But I was persistent. Patient. I courted you properly. Margaret almost laughed. Courted? You're making this sound like a romance novel. Powerful men court the women they actually want, Jiwoo said. They conquer the women they don't respect. Which story protects you better? The logic was brutal but sound. Margaret nodded slowly. Okay, so we've been seeing each other secretly for 6 months. Then why did you go through with the engagement to So-min? Politics. Family obligation. The engagement was arranged years ago, and I couldn't break it without cause. Jiwoo's expression darkened. Until So-min gave me cause by trying to poison me. That freed me to choose what I actually wanted. You. And the kiss? Was you taking a risk to save me? Yes. But it was also you finally claiming me publicly after months of hiding. He tilted his head. In this version, you're not a random waitress who assaulted me. You're the woman I chose, finally brave enough to stop hiding. Margaret processed this, trying to poke holes in the narrative. People will ask why we kept it secret. Because I was engaged and you have integrity. You refused to be the other woman publicly, even though we both knew the engagement was a sham. Jiwoo stood and walked to the windows. It makes you look principled, dignified. Not like someone who would break up a wedding on a whim. I did break up a wedding. You saved my life. There's a difference. He turned to face her. But we need to make sure everyone understands that difference, or they'll paint you as the villain. Margaret stood too, suddenly restless. She walked to the kitchen and refilled her coffee just to have something to do with her hands. This is insane. You're basically writing fiction and asking me to live it. I'm giving you armor, Jiwoo corrected. In my world, perception is protection. If they see you as someone I value, someone I chose deliberately over a political alliance, they won't touch you. But if they see you as a random woman who got lucky with a kiss, you're disposable. The word disposable hung in the air like smoke. Margaret gripped her coffee cup tighter. So what? We just tell people this story and hope they believe it? We don't hope. We practice. Jiwoo moved closer, entering her space in a way that made her breath catch. We learn each other. Favorite foods, music preferences, pet peeves, the kinds of details couples know without thinking. We're not a couple. In public, we are. His voice dropped lower. And in public, you can't hesitate. You can't flinch when I touch you. You can't look uncomfortable when I call you by a nickname or put my arm around you. He reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, almost tender, and Margaret hated how her skin tingled where his fingers brushed. In public, you must own me, Margaret. You must look at me like I'm yours. Because the moment they sense doubt, the moment they see weakness, they'll know it's fake. Margaret's heart hammered. I don't know if I can do that. You kissed me in front of 300 armed criminals, Jiwoo said. You can do this. He stepped back, giving her space again, and Margaret exhaled slowly. Okay. Where do we start? Tell me about yourself. Real things. I need to know who you actually are if I'm going to convince people I'm in love with you. The word love made Margaret's stomach twist, but she forced herself to focus. My name is Margaret Bowers. I'm 28. I was born in Chicago but moved to Seoul 5 years ago for a job opportunity that fell through. I stayed because the international school here offered Keisha a scholarship when our parents died. The words came out mechanical, rehearsed from years of explaining herself at visa offices and employment agencies. I work 3 jobs: catering manager, weekend bartender, and freelance event coordinator. I send Keisha to therapy twice a month because she had nightmares after the accident. I haven't been on a real date in 2 years because I don't have time. I like old movies and terrible reality TV and coffee ice cream. I hate people who are late and liars and... She stopped herself. And, Jiwoo prompted, and men who think they can control women through fear. Margaret met his eyes. So this whole situation is pretty ironic, isn't it? Something flickered across Jiwoo's face. Not quite a smile, but close. I'm not trying to control you through fear. I'm trying to keep you alive through strategy. Is there a difference? Yes. He said it with such certainty that Margaret almost believed him. Fear makes people small. Strategy makes them powerful. I'm giving you power in a situation where you had none. Margaret wanted to argue, but she couldn't. He was right. Without this arrangement, she'd be running or dead. With it, she had protection, resources, and a narrative that made her untouchable. It was still a cage, but at least it was a gilded one. My turn, Jiwoo said. Yu Jiwoo, 32. I inherited my father's organization when I was 19, after he was assassinated by a rival family. I have no siblings. My mother lives in Singapore under a different name because staying in Seoul made her a target. His voice remained level, emotionless, like he was reciting facts about someone else. I don't drink often because I need to stay sharp. I don't sleep much for the same reason. I collect art because my father did, and maintaining his collection makes me feel connected to him. I've killed 7 men personally and ordered the deaths of countless others. I will never be able to walk away from this life, no matter how much I might want to. The honesty was jarring. Margaret stared at him, trying to reconcile this confession with the man who'd made sure her sister got home safely, who'd offered protection instead of abandonment. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what you're pretending to love, Jiwoo said. I'm not a good man, Margaret. I'm a necessary one. I keep order in chaos. I prevent gang wars that would spill civilian blood, but I do it through violence and fear and calculated cruelty. He moved to the bar cart and poured water, not alcohol, like he needed something to do with his hands. So when you look at me in public and pretend to see something worth loving, remember that you're playing a role. Don't make the mistake of believing your own performance. Margaret swallowed hard. You're warning me not to actually fall for you. I'm warning you that the man I am in private is the same man I am in public. There's no secret gentle soul hiding under the dragon tattoo. This is all I am. He drank the water in one swallow. But I keep my promises. And I promise to keep you safe. That's not a lie. They spent the next 3 hours building their backstory. Favorite restaurants they'd supposedly visited. Inside jokes they'd supposedly shared. The weekend trip to Jeju Island that never happened but would explain why Margaret had a tan line Jiwoo would definitely have noticed. It was exhausting, this construction of a fictional relationship, but Margaret couldn't deny the logic. Every detail was another brick in the wall protecting her. By afternoon, Jiwoo's phone buzzed with messages. He read them with an expression that shifted from neutral to concerned. Somin's family is already moving. They're calling in favors, applying pressure. One of my suppliers just canceled a major contract. Because of me? Because of the failed wedding. But they'll use you as the excuse. He typed something quickly. We need to make a public appearance. Soon. Tonight. Preferably. Margaret's stomach dropped. Tonight? I don't have anything to wear to wherever people like you go at night. That's being handled. As if on cue, the elevator doors opened, and 3 women entered carrying garment bags and makeup cases. Jiwoo gestured to them. They'll make sure you look the part. I have meetings until 7. Be ready by then. Ready for what? To convince Seoul's elite that you're worth starting a war over. Jiwoo headed for the elevator, then paused and looked back. And Margaret? When I touch you tonight, when I call you something other than your name, when I look at you like you matter, remember it's performance. Don't read into it. Don't let it confuse you. Then he was gone, and Margaret was left with 3 stylists, and the terrifying realization that tonight, she'd have to become someone else entirely. Someone brave enough, compelling enough, valuable enough to be Yoo Ji-woo's chosen woman. She just hoped she could pull it off without losing herself in the process. The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu, where reservations required 3 months' notice and connections Margaret would never have, where the waitstaff moved like ghosts, and every table cost more than her monthly rent. Margaret stood outside the private dining room in a dress that probably cost more than her car, her hand tucked into the crook of Jiwoo's arm, trying to remember how to breathe. The stylist had transformed her into someone else, hair swept into an elegant updo, makeup subtle but flawless, a black silk dress that hugged every curve and whispered money with every movement. She looked like she belonged here. She felt like an imposter. Remember, Jiwoo murmured against her ear, his breath warm on her skin. You're not a guest. You're mine. Act like it. Then the doors opened, and they walked into a room full of predators. 12 people sat around a table set with crystal and gold, representatives from the major syndicate families that controlled everything from shipping ports to political appointments. Margaret recognized some faces from the wedding cold eyes that had watched her kiss Jiwoo, calculating minds that had been assessing her value ever since. Conversations died as they entered. Every gaze tracked their movement like wolves watching prey. Jiwoo pulled out Margaret's chair himself, a gesture of possessiveness disguised as courtesy. His hand lingered on her shoulder for a moment longer than necessary before he took his own seat. Margaret forced herself to relax into the touch, to look comfortable with his proximity, even though her heart was hammering. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," said an older man at the head of the table, Park Chul-soo, So-min's father. His smile didn't reach his eyes. After the unfortunate events at the wedding, we thought it prudent to discuss the situation civilly. Civilly, Jiwoo repeated, his tone suggesting he found the word amusing. Yes, let's be civil about attempted murder. Murmurs rippled around the table. Park Chul-soo's smile tightened. My daughter maintains her innocence in that matter. She believes there's been a misunderstanding. The doors opened again. So-min walked in wearing red, of course. She wore red this time. A dress cut low enough to be scandalous, high enough to show legs that went on forever. Her makeup was perfect, her hair flawless. but Margaret could see the rage simmering beneath the composed exterior. This was a woman who'd lost everything and wanted someone to bleed for it. "I'm so glad we could all meet," So-min said, her voice dripping false sweetness, as she took a seat directly across from Margaret. "I thought it was important to clear the air about what really happened at my wedding." "Your wedding?" Jiwoo's voice was ice. "I seem to recall it being cancelled. Because of her." So-min's eyes cut to Margaret like knives. "This woman who came out of nowhere, who assaulted you in front of everyone, who clearly orchestrated the entire thing to destroy my reputation." "The poison destroyed your reputation," Margaret heard herself say. The words came out steady, clear, and every eye at the table shifted to her. "I just stopped you from committing murder." So-min's laugh was cruel. "Murder? That's a serious accusation from a waitress playing dress-up." She leaned forward, her smile vicious. "Tell me, Margaret, is it? Where exactly did you learn to identify poison? Is that part of standard catering training in America? Or did you bring it yourself?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Margaret felt Jiwoo tense beside her, but she put her hand on his arm, a small gesture that said, "I've got this," and met So-min's gaze directly. "I learned to identify poison by spending 12 years working events where people like you pretend to be civilized while planning to destroy each other," Margaret said. "You'd be surprised what servers over here when you forget we exist." She picked up her wine glass, examining it in the light with practiced ease. "For instance, I know this is a 2015 Chateau Margaux, which is excellent. But serving it at room temperature in Seoul's summer humidity is amateur hour. Any sommelier worth their salt would have chilled it slightly." So-min's smile faltered. Around the table, several people glanced at their own wine glasses with newfound uncertainty. "I also know," Margaret continued, warming to the topic despite her terror, "that this entire menu is designed to impress rather than compliment. Foie gras followed by black cod? The flavors clash. You'd never see this pairing at a real high-end establishment. It's the kind of choice someone makes when they're spending money to prove they have it, rather than because they have taste." "How dare you?" So-min started. "And that dress," Margaret said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Valentino, isn't it? From 2 seasons ago. Which is fine, of course, but wearing last year's couture to a power dinner is an interesting choice. It sends a message about your current access to resources." The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it, but she kept her expression serene, her posture relaxed. Beside her, she felt more than saw Jiwoo's reaction, a subtle shift. A quiet exhale that might have been surprise. So-min's face had gone white beneath her makeup, then flushed an ugly red. "You're a servant. You have no right to speak to me like—" "She has every right." Jiwoo's voice cut through So-min's rage like a blade through silk. "Because she's mine, and anyone who disrespects her disrespects me." He reached over and took Margaret's hand, threading their fingers together in a gesture that looked casual but felt like a brand. "Margaret knows more about quality and taste in her little finger than you've learned in your entire privileged life. That's why I chose her." Around the table, expressions shifted. Some impressed, some amused, some carefully neutral. Park Chul-soo's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. This was the moment, Margaret realized. The moment when they either accepted her as Jiwoo's choice or rejected her as an imposter. Then Jiwoo did something Margaret didn't expect. He smiled. Not the cold, calculating expression she'd seen before, but something genuine. Something warm. He looked at her like she'd just done something remarkable, and for a heartbeat Margaret forgot it was all performance. "You know," said an older woman to Margaret's left, one of the family matriarchs. If Margaret remembered correctly from Jiwoo's briefing, "I've been attending these dinners for 30 years, and that's the first time anyone's had the courage to tell So-min Park that her taste is pedestrian." She raised her wine glass in a small toast. "Welcome, my dear. You might actually make these gatherings interesting." Others followed suit, raising glasses with expressions ranging from grudging respect to genuine amusement. So-min sat frozen in her chair, her carefully constructed victim narrative crumbling around her. She'd expected Margaret to be intimidated, to make mistakes, to prove she didn't belong. Instead, Margaret had used the very skills So-min had mocked to establish dominance. "Margaret thinks she's better than me just because she has money." So-min's expression seemed to scream. But respect isn't bought, it's earned. And tonight, Margaret had earned hers. The dinner continued with forced civility, but the power dynamic had shifted. So-min's attempts to undermine Margaret fell flat when Margaret could identify which fork was incorrect, which wine pairing was subpar, which conversational gambit was a trap. Every time So-min tried to expose Margaret as an outsider, Margaret's expertise honed from years of serving people exactly like this turned the attack back on itself. "You must teach me your secret." one of the wives said during dessert, leaning toward Margaret conspiratorially. How do you maintain such composure? So-min's been throwing daggers all evening and you haven't flinched. I've worked catering for 12 years, Margaret replied honestly. You learn to handle difficult clients. The woman laughed, delighted. Around the table, others joined in. So-min's face darkened with humiliation. When dinner finally ended, Ji-woo helped Margaret with her chair, another possessive gesture that looked like courtesy, and guided her toward the exit with his hand on the small of her back. As they passed So-min, Margaret heard her hiss something in Korean that sounded like a threat. Ji-woo responded in the same language, his voice too quiet for Margaret to catch, but whatever he said made So-min go pale. They walked out into the cool night air, and Margaret finally let herself exhale. You did well, Ji-woo said once they were in the car, the privacy partition raised. The genuine smile was gone, replaced by his usual careful neutrality, but something had changed. Better than well. You destroyed her credibility without losing your composure. I was terrified the entire time, Margaret admitted. I know, but you didn't show it. That's what matters. He studied her in the dim light filtering through the tinted windows. Where did you learn to talk like that? The wine, the food pairing, the fashion critique. I told you. I've been working high-end events for over a decade. You think I haven't paid attention? That I haven't learned what separates real class from people just spending money? Margaret looked out the window at Seoul passing by. People like So-min forget that servers are invisible until we're not. She thought I'd crumble under pressure because I'm not from her world. She forgot that I've been studying her world my entire career. Ji-woo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My father used to say that true power comes from understanding, not just possessing. You understand these people better than most of them understand themselves. Does that surprise you? Yes, he admitted. And I'm rarely surprised anymore. They drove in silence for a while, and Margaret felt the adrenaline slowly drain from her system, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She'd survived her first public appearance as Yoo Ji-woo's woman. She'd faced down her enemy and won. But as she glanced at the man beside her, at the dragon tattoo barely visible in the darkness, she realized the performance was only getting started. And the scariest part? For just a moment when he'd smiled at her, when his hand had found hers, when he'd defended her with that quiet intensity, it hadn't felt like performance at all. So-min thinks she's better than Margaret just because she has money. If you despise people who judge others based on their bank account or job title, hit that like button. Comment, respect is earned if you're Team Margaret. The gunshot shattered the penthouse window at 2 a.m. Margaret jerked awake in the guest bedroom, her heart already racing before her mind caught up to what the sound meant. Glass. Breaking. Then shouting in Korean, running footsteps. Another shot that made her ears ring even through the walls. She rolled out of bed on instinct, hitting the floor hard, her body remembering every active shooter drill from her American high school days. Stay low, stay quiet, find cover. Her phone was on the nightstand, but she didn't dare reach for it, didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. The bedroom door slammed open. Margaret bit back a scream. Stay down, Ji-woo commanded, and then he was there, pressing her further into the floor with one hand while holding a gun in the other. Blood ran down his left arm, dark and wet, soaking through his white undershirt. Don't move, don't make a sound. More gunfire erupted from the living room. Return fire from Ji-woo's guards, shouting. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Then silence, thick and terrible, broken only by Margaret's ragged breathing and the hammering of her heart. Ji-woo's phone buzzed. He answered it without taking his eyes off the door, speaking rapid Korean that Margaret couldn't follow. Whatever the response was, it made some of the tension leave his shoulders. He lowered the gun slightly. It's over, he said. 2 shooters, both dead. Probably So-min's people testing our security. He looked down at Margaret, who was still pressed against the floor beneath his hand. You can get up now. Margaret's legs shook as she stood. Her borrowed pajamas were twisted around her body, her hair falling loose from its braid. She stared at the blood running down Ji-woo's arm, at the way he held himself carefully, protecting the injury. You're hurt, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Grazed. It's nothing. It's not nothing. You're bleeding all over my floor. The words came out sharper than intended, adrenaline converting to anger the way it always did after fear. Sit down. Let me look at it. I have a doctor, who probably lives 20 minutes away, and you're bleeding now. Sit. Down. Margaret surprised herself with the command. Surprised herself more when Ji-woo actually obeyed, sinking onto the edge of her bed with something that might have been amusement flickering across his face. She grabbed the first aid kit from the bathroom. Of course, a penthouse like this had a fully stocked medical kit, and knelt beside him. Her hands were shaking as she peeled back his blood-soaked sleeve, revealing a bullet graze that had torn through skin and muscle but missed anything vital. "You're right," she said quietly. "It's just a graze, but it needs cleaning and bandaging or it'll get infected. You've done this before." Keisha went through a skateboarding phase. "I got very good at treating road rash." Margaret's hands steadied as she worked, falling into the familiar rhythm of wound care. Clean. Disinfect. Bandage. Don't think about what caused it. Don't think about how close the bullet came to something worse. Jiwoo watched her work in silence. The penthouse had gone quiet except for the low voices of guards securing the perimeter, replacing the shattered window. Margaret could feel his eyes on her face, studying her with that unnerving intensity that made her feel exposed. "You're not asking questions," he said finally. "What questions?" Margaret's voice came out rougher than intended as she tied off the bandage, perhaps tighter than strictly necessary. "Who sent them? Why they came? Whether this will happen again?" "I already know the answers." Margaret sat back on her heels, looking up at him. "So Min sent them. They came because she wants me dead and you protecting me. And yes, it'll happen again until you neutralize the threat like you promised." She stood abruptly, needing distance. "I'm not naive, Jiwoo. I know what I signed up for. Do you?" He stood too, moving closer despite the fresh bandage, despite the blood still staining his clothes. "Because you're shaking. I was just shot at. You were shot at because of me. Because I claimed you. Because I dragged you into a war you didn't start." His voice dropped lower. "You should be furious, terrified, demanding I let you go. Would you let me go?" Margaret met his eyes, searching for truth in that unreadable expression. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken answers. Then Jiwoo reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, and brushed his thumb across her cheekbone. It came away wet. Margaret hadn't realized she was crying. "No," he said finally, honestly. "Because letting you go means letting you die. And I don't break my promises." Something in his tone made Margaret's breath catch. This wasn't the cold Mafia boss or the calculated strategist. This was something rawer, more human. The adrenaline still coursing through both their systems had stripped away the usual carefully maintained distance. "Why?" Margaret whispered. "Why does it matter so much? I'm nobody. Just a catering manager who kissed you to save your life. You don't owe me this much. You think saving someone's life creates a small debt?" Jiwoo's hand was still on her face, his thumb now tracing the line of her jaw with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. "In my world, that's everything. That's the only thing that actually matters. In your world, people try to kill you at 2 in the morning. Yes, they do." His other hand came up to frame her face, and Margaret knew she should step back, should remind him of the boundaries they'd established, should remember this was all performance. But her body wouldn't cooperate. That's why when someone risks everything to keep me alive, when someone sees what I am and doesn't run, when someone... He stopped himself, jaw tightening. When someone what? Margaret's heart hammered for entirely different reasons now. When someone looks at the monster and treats his wounds anyway. Jiwoo's voice had gone rough, almost raw. "You should have left me bleeding. Would have been safer. That's not who I am. I know." His thumb brushed her lower lip, a touch so light it might have been imaginary except for the way it made her breath stop. That's the problem. Margaret knew what was about to happen. She could see it in the way Jiwoo's eyes had darkened, in the way the space between them had somehow shrunk to nothing, in the way her own body was leaning toward him despite every logical reason to retreat. The contract said no real intimacy. The contract said this was business. The contract said... His phone buzzed. The spell broke. Jiwoo stepped back immediately, distance reimposing itself between them like a wall slamming down. He answered the phone with his usual cold efficiency, speaking in Korean while Margaret tried to remember how to breathe normally. When he hung up, his expression had returned to its usual careful neutrality. "The doctor is here. He'll check my arm. Make sure there's no glass fragments you might have missed." "I didn't miss anything," Margaret said, but her voice shook. "I know, but protocol." He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. "Margaret." "What?" "I never wanted the wedding to So Min. It was arranged when I was 23, before I fully understood what running this organization would cost. Before I realized that a political merger masquerading as marriage would mean spending my life with someone who saw me as a trophy, not a person." His eyes held hers. "I wanted someone real. Someone who would see all of it, the violence, the dragon, the blood, and stay anyway. Someone who would treat my wounds at 2 in the morning and yell at me for bleeding on the floor." Margaret's throat tightened. "Jiwoo, but wanting something doesn't mean I get to have it, not in this life." He opened the door, letting the sounds of the guards and the doctor filter in. Get some sleep. We'll increase security tomorrow. This won't happen again. Then he was gone, and Margaret was alone in the guest bedroom with her racing heart and the terrible realization that the boundaries of their contract were already blurring. She'd felt something when he touched her face. Something real beneath the performance. And from the way he'd looked at her, the way his voice had roughened, the way he'd stopped himself from closing that final distance between them, he'd felt it too. Margaret sank onto the bed, her hands still shaking from adrenaline and something more dangerous. She'd signed a contract for protection, for a fake relationship that would keep her and Keisha safe until the threat passed. She hadn't signed up for the way her heart had stuttered when Jiwoo admitted he wanted someone real. She hadn't signed up for the warmth of his hands on her face or the rawness in his voice when he'd called himself a monster. She definitely hadn't signed up for the traitorous part of her brain that whispered maybe the monster wasn't as monstrous as he wanted her to believe. Maybe the man who ensured her sister got home safely, who kept his promises, who admitted he'd never wanted the political marriage in the first place. Maybe that man was worth the risk, but risk was what had gotten her into this mess in the first place. Risk was what made her kiss a Mafia boss at his own wedding. Risk was what kept landing her in impossible situations with no good options. Margaret lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling where bullet holes would need to be repaired, and wondered at what point the performance would stop feeling like a lie. At what point she'd stop being able to tell the difference between the armor Jiwoo had given her and the person she was becoming beneath it. The scary answer? Maybe she'd already crossed that line. Maybe it had happened the moment his thumb brushed her cheek and she hadn't pulled away. Maybe it had happened even earlier, when he'd smiled at her genuinely for the first time at the dinner, and her heart had done something complicated in her chest. Or maybe, and this was the most terrifying possibility, it had happened the moment she'd decided his life was worth saving, before she knew anything about him except that he was about to die, and she couldn't let that happen. Margaret closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but all she could see was the look in Jiwoo's eyes when he'd admitted wanting someone real. All she could feel was the ghost of his touch on her face, and all she could hear was her own voice, small and scared, whispering a truth she wasn't ready to admit. She was starting to care about the dragon in ways that had nothing to do with contracts or protection or performance. And that was more dangerous than any assassin. The photo came through on Margaret's phone at 3 p.m, while she was reviewing security protocols with one of Jiwoo's guards in the penthouse living room. At first, Margaret's brain refused to process what she was seeing. It couldn't be real. It was Photoshop, a sick joke, anything but what it actually was. But then her eyes focused on the details, the chemistry textbook visible in the corner, the same purple scrunchie Keisha had been wearing in their video call that morning, the terror in her sister's eyes that no amount of digital manipulation could fake. Keisha was tied to a chair in a room Margaret didn't recognize. Duct tape across her mouth, tears streaming down her 17-year-old face. And behind her, barely visible in the frame, stood a man in a black mask holding something that glinted like a knife. The text that accompanied the photo was simple. Trade. You for her. Alone. 1 hour. Address to follow. Margaret's phone clattered to the floor. The world tilted sideways. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stare at her baby sister's terrified face on the screen. This was her fault. She'd kissed Jiwoo to save his life, and now Keisha was paying the price. Keisha, who'd just gotten her driver's license. Keisha, who wanted to study veterinary medicine. Keisha, who still had nightmares about the car accident that killed their parents and now would have new nightmares about this. Miss Bowers? The guard's voice seemed to come from very far away. What's wrong? Margaret couldn't speak. She picked up the phone with shaking hands, zoomed in on the photo to make sure. To be absolutely certain. That was Keisha's necklace, the small silver cross their mother had given her. That was the scar on her left forearm from the skateboarding accident. That was real fear in her eyes. Real tears on her face. Where is Jiwoo? Margaret's voice came out strangled, barely human. I need to see him now. The guard made a call. 2 minutes later, Jiwoo emerged from his office, his expression already hardening as he took in Margaret's face. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply held out his hand for the phone. Margaret watched his jaw tighten as he looked at the photo, watched something cold and terrible settle over his features. When he looked up, his eyes were the eyes of the man who'd killed 7 people personally and ordered countless other deaths. The dragon, not the man who'd touched her face at 2 a.m. When did this come through? His voice was deadly calm. 2 minutes ago. They want me. They said I have 1 hour. They'll send the address. Margaret was already moving toward her bedroom, her mind racing through logistics. What to wear, what to bring, how to convince them to let Keisha go before they killed them both. I need to go. I need to. Jiwoo's hand closed around her wrist, stopping her mid-stride. You're not going anywhere. They have my sister, Margaret's voice cracked. They have Keisha, and they're going to hurt her if I don't. If you go, they'll kill you both. Jiwoo's grip tightened, not painful but immovable. That's the play. Get you alone, execute you for revenge, then kill Keisha, because she's a witness. So-min gets what she wants, and there's no one left to testify about what really happened. I don't care. Margaret tried to wrench her arm free, but Jiwoo was stronger, pulling her back toward him with controlled force. That's my baby sister. She's 17 years old. She has nothing to do with this. Nothing. If So-min wants me dead, then fine. I'll trade myself. But Keisha walks away. That's non-negotiable. No trade, Jiwoo said flatly. You don't get to decide that. She's my sister, my responsibility. And you're mine. The words came out harsh, possessive, final. Which means I don't let you walk into an obvious trap. Which means we don't negotiate with people who target children. Which means... He stopped himself, breathing hard, then forced his voice back to its usual deadly calm. We don't trade, Margaret. We take. Margaret stared at him, her mind struggling to shift gears from panic to strategy. What? So-min made a mistake. She thinks you're the weak point because you love your sister. She thinks you'll sacrifice yourself stupidly, emotionally, without thinking. Jiwoo released Margaret's wrist and moved to his phone, already making calls in rapid Korean. She's wrong. You're not weak, and I don't trade. I take what's mine. In 1 hour. We have more than an hour. They'll wait. They want you compliant, not panicked. Jiwoo's fingers flew across his phone screen, pulling up maps, surveillance data, contacts. The address they send will be a secondary location. They'll move Keisha at least once more before bringing you in. That gives us time. Time for what? Margaret's voice was rising toward hysteria. Time for them to hurt her? Time for them to... Time to find her. Jiwoo looked up, and for the first time since seeing the photo, Margaret saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. Something almost like fury. Targeting family is the lowest of the low. It's a line you don't cross, not even in this world. So-min just declared herself an enemy to every family with children in Seoul's underworld. He made another call, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. The next 45 minutes were a controlled chaos that Margaret could barely follow. Jiwoo's entire organization mobilized with terrifying efficiency. Calls went out to every contact, every informant, every person who owed him favors. Traffic cameras were accessed. Cell phone signals were traced. A 17-year-old girl with purple scrunchie last seen near her school. Someone must have seen something. Known something. Heard something. Margaret paced the penthouse like a caged animal, her phone clutched in her hand, waiting for the address that would tell them where to deliver her to her death. Every second that passed was another second Keisha spent terrified and tied up. Another second closer to permanent harm. Another second Margaret had failed in her most basic responsibility as an older sister. I should have seen this coming, Margaret said, her voice hollow. I should have taken Keisha somewhere safe. Out of Seoul. Out of Korea. You should have done exactly what you did. Jiwoo interrupted without looking up from the 3 phones he was monitoring simultaneously. You saved my life. Everything that happened after that is So-min's choice, not yours. Don't take ownership of someone else's cruelty. But Keisha, we'll be home by tonight, I promise you. Jiwoo's eyes met hers, and Margaret saw absolute certainty there. I keep my promises, Margaret. You know this. The address came through at the 50-minute mark. An abandoned warehouse in Incheon, 40 minutes outside Seoul. Exactly the kind of place where people disappeared and bodies were found weeks later. Margaret's stomach turned. I'm going, she said. With or without your permission, I'm going to that address. I know. Jiwoo was already moving, shrugging into a shoulder holster, checking ammunition with practiced efficiency. Which is why I'm coming with you. They said alone. And I say no. He looked at her, and there was something fierce in his expression that made Margaret's breath catch. You risked your life to save mine. You think I'm letting you walk into a trap alone? You think I'm going to sit here while So-min tries to take what's mine? He moved closer, close enough that Margaret could see the dragon tattoo pulsing at his neck. We're going together. You're the bait. I'm the trap. And So-min is about to learn what happens when you touch my family. The word family hit Margaret like a physical blow. Not his family, his family. Keisha wasn't just Margaret's sister anymore. By claiming Margaret, Jiwoo had extended his protection to everyone she loved. And by taking Keisha, So-min had violated that protection. My team found her, one of Jiwoo's men said, bursting into the room with a tablet. Not at the warehouse. At a shipping container facility 3 blocks away, 6 hostiles visible. Your sister is in container 47. Jiwoo studied the screen with predatory focus. How many exits? 3. But they're watching all of them. Good. That means they're expecting Margaret to come through an exit. Jiwoo's smile was cold and terrible. We'll go through the roof. 20 minutes later, Margaret was in the back of an SUV speeding toward Incheon with Jiwoo beside her, and 4 armed guards in the vehicle behind them. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was insane. She was a catering manager who'd been living a normal, boring, safe life 2 weeks ago. Now she was part of a tactical rescue operation run by the Korean Mafia. When we get there, Jiwoo said, his voice steady despite the speed they were traveling. You stay behind me. You don't engage. You don't try to be brave. You find Keisha, you get her out, and you let me handle the rest. Handle it how? Jiwoo checked his gun one more time, his movements efficient and deadly. However necessary, Margaret wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could fight, wanted to be more than just the person who needed saving. But she looked at Jiwoo's face, at the cold certainty there, at the dragon fully unleashed, and realized this was what he'd been warning her about. This was the violence he'd promised was always beneath the surface. This was the man who'd killed 7 people personally and would kill 6 more tonight without hesitation if they'd hurt Keisha. And the terrifying part? Margaret wasn't scared of him. She was grateful. Jiwoo, she said quietly. Thank you. He looked at her then, and something softened in his expression. Just for a moment. Just long enough for Margaret to see the man beneath the dragon. You saved my life, Margaret. This is me returning the favor. We protect our own. That's the only rule that actually matters. Family first, Margaret thought as the SUV pulled up to the shipping facility, and Jiwoo's team began to move. That's what he was teaching her. That in his world, loyalty to family trumped everything else. And somehow, in the span of 2 weeks, Margaret and Keisha had become his family. She just hoped they all survived long enough for that to mean something. Targeting family is the lowest of the low. If you believe you never touch a person's family no matter the beef, hit subscribe immediately. Comment family first to show you stand against cowards like Somin. The shipping facility smelled like rust and salt water and something darker Margaret couldn't identify. Blood, maybe. Old violence soaked into concrete. Jiwoo's team moved like shadows across the rooftop, their footsteps silent despite the metal surface. Below them, through the grimy skylight, Margaret could see the interior of the warehouse, rows of shipping containers stacked like building blocks, narrow corridors between them creating a maze. And in the center, illuminated by a single work light, Keisha still tied to the chair. Margaret's hands clenched into fists. Her sister was crying, shoulders shaking, head bowed. Alive, still alive. That was all that mattered. 6 guards visibly, one of Jiwoo's men whispered, pointing them out through the skylight. 3 more in the office, 2 on the exits. Somin herself is in the office watching the cameras. She wants to see Margaret's face when they kill her, Jiwoo said, his voice empty of emotion. Wants to watch the fear, the realization. She's made this personal. It was always personal, Margaret said. Jiwoo looked at her, something shifting in his expression. Then he started removing his weapons. The shoulder holster, the backup piece at his ankle, the knife strapped to his forearm. He handed them all to his second-in-command until he looked unarmed, just a man in a black shirt and tactical pants. What are you doing? Margaret whispered, walking into a trap. Jiwoo's smile was cold. They're expecting you to show up alone and desperate. Instead, they'll get me, seemingly unarmed, and apparently stupid enough to trade myself for a teenager. He turned to Margaret. You're going to walk in with me. You're going to be the distraction while my team positions. When I give the signal... What signal? You'll know it when you see it. Jiwoo cupped her face briefly, a gesture that looked tender, but felt like a promise. Stay behind me, no matter what happens, no matter what you see. You stay behind me. They went in through the front entrance like they had nothing to hide. Jiwoo's hand was at the small of Margaret's back, guiding her through the rusted metal door with the confidence of a man who owned the place. The guards saw them immediately, weapons raising, shouting in Korean, "I'm here for the trade." Jiwoo called out in English, his voice echoing off the metal walls. The girl for me. That's what Somin wants, isn't it? The guards exchanged glances, confused. This wasn't the script. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. One of them spoke into a radio, and seconds later, Somin's voice crackled through a speaker mounted somewhere in the shadows. You, Jiwoo, how noble of you to sacrifice yourself for your little pet sister. Her laugh was brittle, cruel. But you're not the trade I asked for. I wanted Margaret. Margaret stays with me, Jiwoo said simply. You get me instead. Better deal, really. You wanted revenge? You wanted to hurt me for choosing her over you? Here I am, unarmed, Alone. Take your shot. Margaret could hear So-min's sharp intake of breath over the speaker. This was throwing off her plan, disrupting whatever sick pleasure she'd imagined getting from watching Margaret sacrifice herself. Jiwoo had stolen her moment. You think I'm stupid? So-min's voice had lost its composed edge. You think I don't know you're planning something? That you came here without backup? I came here to get the girl. Jiwoo started walking toward Keisha, his movements slow and controlled. Everything else is negotiable. The guards moved to intercept him. Margaret's heart hammered as she followed, staying behind Jiwoo like he'd ordered, watching the way he moved predatory, calculated, like a man waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This was the dragon everyone feared. This was the violence So-min had tried to poison away. They were 10 feet from Keisha when So-min herself appeared from the office, flanked by 2 more guards. She was still beautiful in that perfect, polished way, still wearing designer clothes like this was a business meeting instead of a kidnapping. But her eyes were wild, her composure cracking. You humiliated me, she said, her voice shaking. In front of everyone. You chose a servant over me, over my family, over everything we could have built together. You tried to poison me, Jiwoo replied calmly. Seems like we both made choices. And now you're going to die for yours. So-min raised her hand, signaling the guards. Kill him. Kill them both. Make it slow. The signal came not from Jiwoo's mouth, but from his body. 1 second, he was standing still, seemingly accepting his fate. The next, he was moving faster than Margaret's eyes could track, faster than the guards could react. His hand shot out and grabbed the nearest guard's gun arm, twisting with a crack that made Margaret's stomach turn. The gun clattered to the ground. Jiwoo caught it mid-fall. Then the skylight shattered. Jiwoo's team dropped through the opening like avenging angels, guns already firing. The warehouse erupted into chaos, guards scrambling for cover, So-min screaming orders. Keisha sobbing behind her gag. And Jiwoo became something else entirely. The careful businessman vanished, replaced by pure violence. He moved through the guards like death itself, every movement efficient and brutal. No wasted motion, no hesitation, just the dragon unleashed, doing what dragons did best. Margaret ran to Keisha, her hands shaking as she worked at the ropes. I've got you, she whispered, pulling the tape from her sister's mouth as gently as she could. I've got you. You're safe. I'm here. Margaret. Keisha's voice was hoarse, terrified. Behind you. Margaret spun just in time to see a guard emerging from behind a container, his gun aimed not at Jiwoo but at her. The shot would be easy, point blank, fatal. She was going to die, and Keisha was going to watch, and her hand found something on the ground, a piece of metal pipe, rusted and heavy. Margaret didn't think. She just moved. The pipe connected with the guard's skull with a sound that would haunt her nightmares. He went down hard, but there was another one. In the chaos, in the shadows. Margaret hadn't seen him. This guard was smarter, more patient. He'd been waiting for his moment, and his gun was aimed at Jiwoo's back while the dragon was engaged with 3 other attackers. Jiwoo! Margaret's scream cut through the gunfire. She grabbed the fallen guard's weapon. God, she'd never held a real gun before and fired. The recoil nearly knocked her backward. The shot went wild, but it was enough. Enough to make the hidden guard flinch. Enough to give Jiwoo the split second he needed to turn and put 2 bullets in the man's chest. The warehouse went silent. Jiwoo's team had neutralized the remaining guards. Bodies littered the concrete floor. So-min stood frozen against a container wall. Her designer dress splattered with blood that wasn't hers. Her perfect composure finally, completely shattered. Jiwoo walked toward her slowly, the gun still in his hand, his shirt torn and bloody. He looked like something out of a nightmare, beautiful and terrible and absolutely deadly. You targeted a child, he said, his voice soft and more terrifying for it. You crossed the one line that even people like us don't cross. She was leverage, So-min spat. Just leverage. I wasn't going to actually... You terrorized a 17-year-old girl to get revenge on the woman I chose. Jiwoo's hand shot out, grabbing So-min's throat and slamming her back against the container with enough force to dent the metal. You made this about hurting innocent people. About destroying families. That's not business. That's not even revenge. That's just cruelty. So-min clawed at his hand, gasping. You can't, my father, the Alliance. Your father will disown you after this. Targeting civilians, especially children. Every family and soul will turn against you. Jiwoo leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper Margaret could barely hear. You gambled everything on breaking me by hurting what I care about. And you lost? He released her. So-min collapsed to the ground, coughing, her perfect image destroyed. Jiwoo turned his back on her, the ultimate dismissal, and walked to where Margaret stood with Keisha, helping her sister stand on shaking legs. "You saved my life," Jiwoo said to Margaret. His eyes held something she couldn't quite identify. "Again, you saved my sister." Margaret's voice broke. "We're even." "No." Jiwoo reached out and gently wiped blood from Margaret's cheek. She hadn't realized she was bleeding. "We're family. That's different." Behind them, Jiwoo's men were securing So-min in zip ties, calling cleanup crews, making the warehouse disappear from official records. This would never have happened, according to Seoul's police. Just another abandoned building with nothing to see. But Margaret had seen it. She'd seen the dragon fully unleashed. She'd seen Jiwoo become the killer he'd warned her he was. She'd seen him brutalize men without hesitation, without mercy, with the kind of violence that should have terrified her. Instead, she'd picked up a gun and shot at someone to protect him. She'd proven her loyalty wasn't just words on a contract or a performance for cameras. When it mattered, when his life was on the line, she'd chosen him over her own safety. And from the way Jiwoo was looking at her now like she was something precious and dangerous, and worth every risk, he knew exactly what that meant. So-min thought she could bully her way to the top by targeting the innocent. She thought fear and cruelty would get her what ambition and poison couldn't. But bullies always underestimate the people they hurt. They never see the strength in the ones they dismiss. Tonight, So-min learned the hard way. And Margaret learned something too. She learned that love, real love, the kind that makes you pick up a gun to save someone, the kind that makes you walk into a warehouse knowing you might die, that kind of love doesn't follow contracts or boundaries or logic. It just is, and it changes everything. So-min thought she could bully her way to the top. If you love seeing bullies finally get what they deserve, smash the like button. Let's get this video to 5,000 likes for justice served cold. 3 days after the warehouse, Margaret stood in the penthouse living room, watching Seoul's skyline turn gold in the setting sun, and tried to remember what normal felt like. Keisha was safe. That was the important thing. Her sister had been checked by doctors, cleared by therapists, and was currently staying with a friend's family while she processed what had happened. Margaret visited twice a day, held her while she cried, promised her the nightmare was over. And it was. So-min Park had been exiled from Korea with a price on her head if she ever returned. Her family had publicly disowned her, cutting all ties to avoid the fallout. The alliance was dead. The threat was neutralized. Margaret should have been relieved. Instead, she felt hollow. The elevator doors opened. Jiwoo stepped out wearing jeans and a plain black shirt, no suit, no armor, just the man underneath. The dragon tattoo was fully visible now, curling up his neck like it was reaching for something it could never quite grasp. He held an envelope in his hands. "We need to talk," he said. Margaret's stomach dropped. She'd been expecting this conversation, dreading it, knowing it was coming ever since Jiwoo had told her the threat was gone. Their contract had fulfilled its purpose. She'd played the role of his lover for long enough to root out the traitors and eliminate So-min. Now it was time for her to go back to her real life. Back to catering events and 3 jobs and pretending the last few weeks hadn't fundamentally changed who she was. "Okay," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Jiwoo walked to the windows, standing beside her but not touching. The distance between them felt vast. "So-min is gone. The Park family has withdrawn from all joint ventures. The other families have accepted that you're under my protection permanently, not because you're playing a role, but because you proved yourself in that warehouse." He paused. "Which means our arrangement has served its purpose. You're safe now. Keisha is safe. You don't need to stay." Margaret's heart was hammering. "And if I want to stay, you don't." Jiwoo's voice was flat, emotionless. "You want your life back, your freedom, your sister without armed guards watching her school, a future that doesn't involve looking over your shoulder or wondering if today's the day someone tries to use you to get to me." He held out the envelope. "So I'm giving it to you." Margaret took it with shaking hands. Inside was a plane ticket to Chicago first class, departing in 2 days, and a check. She stared at the number, trying to process all those zeros. Enough money to start over anywhere in the world, enough to put Keisha through any university, enough to never work 3 jobs again. "It's what we agreed," Jiwoo said quietly. "You play the role until the threat is gone. Then you're free. I keep my promises, Margaret. I know you do." Margaret's voice came out barely above a whisper. She looked at the ticket, at the date printed there, at the freedom it represented. This was everything she should want. Safety. Security. A life where she wasn't constantly performing, constantly wondering if today would be the day another assassin came through the window. But all she could think about was Jiwoo's hand on her face at 2 in the morning, His admission that he'd never wanted the political marriage. The way he'd said, "We're family in the warehouse," like he meant it. The genuine smile he'd given her at the dinner when she'd destroyed So-min's credibility. The rawness in his voice when he'd called himself a monster, and she'd treated his wounds anyway. "What if I don't want to leave?" Margaret asked. Jiwoo's jaw tightened. "Margaret, what if I want to stay? What if I want—" She stopped, trying to find the courage to finish. "What if I want this to be real?" The silence stretched between them like broken glass. Jiwoo turned to face her fully, and his expression was carefully, dangerously neutral. "You don't know what you're saying. The adrenaline, the fear, the forced intimacy, it creates a false sense of connection. It's not real. Don't tell me what I feel." Margaret's hands clenched around the envelope, crumpling the expensive paper. "I'm not a child. I'm not confused. And I'm not suffering from Stockholm Syndrome or whatever psychological explanation you're going to give me." She took a breath. "I'm telling you that somewhere between the contract and the performance and the bullets, this became real for me. You became real for me. I'm a killer." Jiwoo's voice went hard. "I'm the man who brutalized 6 people in front of you, who runs an empire built on violence, who will never be able to walk away from this life. Never be able to give you normal." "I don't want normal." Margaret's voice rose. "I had normal. Normal was working myself to exhaustion and barely making rent and pretending I was okay when I was drowning. Normal was safe and small and suffocating." She moved closer to him, close enough to see the muscle jumping in his jaw. "You know what you are? You're a man who kept his promise, who protected my sister like she was his own, who gave me armor when I was defenseless, who admitted he wanted someone real and then actually treated me like I mattered. You do matter." The words came out rough. "That's why you need to leave. Because you matter too much. Because if you stay, eventually something will happen, another So-min, another threat, another warehouse, and I won't be able to protect you. I'll fail. And you'll pay the price for my failure. Or I'll pick up a gun and save your life again." Margaret reached up and touched his face, feeling the sharp line of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. "We protect each other. That's what you taught me. That's what family means." Jiwoo's eyes closed briefly, like her touch caused him physical pain. "Margaret, please. Take the ticket. Take the money. Go live the life you deserve." "What if the life I deserve is the one I choose?" Margaret's hand moved to the envelope, to the plane ticket inside. She held it up between them so Jiwoo could see it clearly. Then she tore it in half. "What if I choose you?" The sound of ripping paper seemed deafening in the quiet penthouse. Jiwoo stared at the destroyed ticket, something breaking across his face. Shock, hope, fear, all at once. "You don't know what you're giving up," he said. "Yes, I do. I'm giving up safe. I'm giving up simple. I'm giving up the fantasy that I can go back to who I was before I kissed you at that wedding." Margaret tore the ticket again, smaller pieces now, letting them flutter to the floor like snow. "But I'm choosing real. I'm choosing you. The dragon tattoo and the violence and the empire and the man underneath who wanted someone to see him and stay anyway. I'll ruin you." Jiwoo's voice was barely audible. "Maybe." Margaret smiled despite the tears forming in her eyes. "Or maybe we'll ruin each other in the best possible way. Maybe we'll build something new out of the wreckage. Maybe—" Her courage faltered. "Maybe you'll choose me back?" Jiwoo moved so fast Margaret barely registered it before his hands were in her hair and his mouth was on hers. Not gentle. Not careful. Desperate. Like he'd been holding back for weeks and couldn't anymore. Like he'd been waiting for permission to want this. Want her. Want something beyond duty and protection and performance. Margaret kissed him back with everything she had, all the fear and adrenaline and impossible feelings she'd been trying to deny. This wasn't part of the contract. This wasn't for cameras or witnesses. This was just them. Finally honest. Finally real. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jiwoo pressed his forehead to hers. "You're insane," he whispered. "Probably." Margaret's hands had found their way to his shoulders, holding on like he might disappear. "But I already knew that. I kissed a Mafia boss at his own wedding, remember? And now you're choosing to stay with him." Jiwoo's laugh was shaky, disbelieving. "What does that say about you? That I make terrible decisions and somehow they work out?" Margaret pulled back just enough to see his face, to see the vulnerability there that he rarely showed anyone, or that I recognize something worth fighting for when I see it. Even if that something is a dragon, especially if it's a dragon. Margaret traced the tattoo on his neck with gentle fingers. "Because dragons protect their treasure, and I think maybe I'm yours." "You are." Jiwoo caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "You have been since the moment you risked everything to save my life. I just didn't want to trap you in mine." You're not trapping me. I'm choosing this. Choosing us. Margaret glanced at the torn ticket pieces on the floor, at the check she'd dropped without even looking at the amount. So what happens now? Now? Jiwoo's smile was real, warm, the one Margaret had only seen a handful of times. Now we figure out what we actually are when we're not pretending. Now we rebuild the empire without the toxic alliances. Now we... He stopped, something uncertain crossing his face. Now I ask you to marry me. For real this time. Not for politics or protection or performance. Just because I want you. Because you're the only person who's ever seen all of me and stayed. Margaret's breath caught. That's not a question. Margaret Bowers, will you marry me? Jiwoo asked properly. And there was something almost nervous in his voice. Will you choose this life, this violence, this man, knowing exactly what it means? Margaret thought about Keisha safe and healing. About the empire that could be reshaped into something less cruel. About the man in front of her who'd killed to protect her, and would kill again without hesitation. About the dragon tattoo that meant burden and responsibility, and a life that could never be ordinary. Yes, she said, I choose you, all of it. 6 months later, Margaret stood in a private garden wearing a dress the color of champagne, not white, because this wasn't her first beginning, and not red, because that color belonged to someone else's failed ambition. Keisha stood beside her as maid of honor, still healing but stronger than before. The guests were small in number, just the families that mattered, the alliances worth keeping, the people who'd accepted that Margaret wasn't a political tool but Jiwoo's actual choice. No red dresses in sight, no poison in the champagne, no ulterior motives hiding behind congratulations. Just Margaret and Jiwoo, redefining what the empire could be when it was built on something real instead of something calculated. When Jiwoo kissed her this time, it was gentle, reverent, a promise instead of a performance. And when Margaret looked out at the witnesses, she saw respect instead of skepticism. She'd earned her place here. Not through birthright or connections or political maneuvering, but through courage and loyalty, and the willingness to fight for what mattered. The dragon had found someone real, and Margaret had found someone worth the risk. Together, they would build something new from the ashes of what came before. It wasn't the safe choice, but it was the right one, and that made all the difference.